In the hushed chambers of the nation's highest court, a clash unfolded that no one expected, and even fewer will forget. When Chief Justice John Roberts thought he could publicly belittle former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, what followed shook the very room in which it happened. What begins as a courtroom exchange quickly transforms into a battle of pride, intellect, and public perception. One underestimated woman, one towering institution, and a single moment that turns the tables. Make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss the truth behind this unforgettable confrontation. The marble floors of the Supreme Court glistened beneath the early light as a tightly packed audience leaned forward in anticipation. A case was on the docket that most assumed would be routine, even symbolic. But what they did not expect, what no one expected, was the storm about to erupt between a justice and a woman long counted out. Pam Bondi had stepped into the courtroom with poise, not the look of someone seeking confrontation, but of someone who had prepared every inch of her mind for it. Her presence was magnetic, if unconventional in the highest court of the land. She was not cloaked in robes or standing behind a podium. Instead, she sat across from a panel of robed giants, ready to challenge a precedent she believed was morally, constitutionally, and spiritually flawed. But from the moment she began to speak, subtle barbs flicked in her direction. Judge John Roberts, dignified and methodical as always, offered his usual thin smile. Yet this time, it came with an edge. "Miss Bondi," he interrupted, barely a minute into her argument, "are you sure you are in the right courtroom? This is not a campaign rally." A soft chuckle rippled across the courtroom. Roberts did not laugh. He stared, direct, calculated. A warning. Pam blinked once, calmly, unshaken. She continued, but the tone had been set. For the next 10 minutes, every legal theory she introduced was questioned, rephrased with a smirk, or dismissed with cool detachment. Roberts used his voice not as a judge, but as a weapon. He did not challenge her law, he questioned her legitimacy, her right to argue at his level. Why did his words feel more personal than judicial? Why was the Chief Justice, who prided himself on restraint, sounding more like a prosecutor than a neutral arbiter? Had Pam Bondi struck a nerve, or was this about something deeper? As the questions continued, the air shifted. The gallery sensed it. This was no longer about the case. It was about pride, ego, and control. And yet Bondi remained still. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands never shook. Was she waiting for something? Was she letting him dig his own rhetorical grave? "You seem passionate, Miss Bondi," Roberts said flatly, interrupting her again. "But passion does not rewrite the Constitution. Would you like to continue your monologue, or can we proceed with the law?" It was meant to end her. But it didn't. Pam Bondi's eyes met his. And what followed next changed the entire courtroom. Would she take the insult? Would she lash out? Or would she reveal that behind her calm demeanor stood something far more dangerous to judicial arrogance? Preparation? Was it possible that Judge Roberts had underestimated not just a political rival, but a legal mind sharper than his own? The room leaned forward. Something was about to happen. And when it did, it would leave everyone stunned, including the man who had spent his career controlling every word from the bench. A single pause. That was all she gave him. Not the flinch he had hoped for. Not the indignation he wanted to provoke. Just silence, a precise moment of restraint. Then Pam Bondi leaned forward, just enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. "Your Honor," she began, voice measured like steel beneath velvet. "With all due respect, the Constitution was not written to cushion egos, but to challenge them." A hush fell like a curtain over the chamber. The blow did not come with volume. It came with precision. Bondi was not shouting, she was dissecting. She was doing what few dared to do, turning the weight of Roberts's own arrogance back onto him, with legal finesse. Roberts froze, his lips tightening. Somewhere in the gallery, a pen clicked nervously. The moment had shifted. She was no longer defending herself. She was indicting his conduct. Bondi continued without pause. If my arguments appear passionate, it's because the stakes are real, not just for my client, not just for this courtroom, but for the millions outside these walls who still believe the law should serve the people, not power. Then came the avalanche. Pam reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document. It was not part of the expected exhibits. She raised it for all to see. A legal precedent, buried deep in federal case law, one most scholars had forgotten. "I'd like to enter this into the record," she said calmly. "It's a 1993 ruling, co-authored, interestingly enough, by none other than yourself, Judge Roberts, during your time as Deputy Solicitor General." Gasps fluttered from the audience. Roberts blinked, suddenly less amused. He turned to the bailiff, gave a terse nod. The document was passed forward. As it landed in his hands, Roberts's eyes scanned the page. His brows furrowed, then dropped. Bondi had found a contradiction, an argument he once defended that now undermined his entire line of questioning. "You argued this principle was fundamental," she reminded him. "Yet today, when I invoke the same protection on behalf of my client, you call it a monologue. What changed, Your Honor?" The silence was deafening. Was this justice or hypocrisy cloaked in robes? Had Roberts's courtroom become a place of personal vendettas rather than impartial law? It was not the kind of challenge judges were used to facing. Not in public, not from someone who had once been painted by the media as simply a political figure. And yet, here she stood, unraveling decades of deference with nothing but her intellect and a few carefully chosen documents. Reporters scribbled furiously in the back rows. Cameras, though banned, might as well have been rolling in every spectator's eyes. Roberts cleared his throat. "Miss Bondi, this court will evaluate all relevant documents, but I advise you not to confuse rhetorical flourish with legal merit." "I would never confuse the two," she replied, unblinking. "But perhaps that's the problem. Too many courts have." For the first time, Roberts leaned back in his chair, not in confidence, but retreat. He was no longer steering the room. Pam Bondi was, and everyone felt it. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a quiet unraveling. Pam Bondi, often underestimated as merely a political figurehead, had crossed an invisible line. She had stepped into the realm where legal scholars whispered behind closed doors, where judges wielded their gavel not just for order, but for dominance. And she was standing firm. The courtroom, once bristling with routine tension, now simmered with something heavier: anticipation. Every legal clerk, every intern, every journalist was holding their breath. Because this was no longer about one case. It had become a war of ideologies, a moment that would echo beyond the wood-paneled walls. Roberts shuffled the papers, looking for a rebuttal buried in precedent or procedure. But the document Bondi had produced, signed and argued by him decades earlier, wasn't just admissible. It was damning. Still, pride dies slowly in a man like Roberts. He raised his voice, not in anger, but in reassertion of control. "Miss Bondi, do you intend to put this court on trial?" Pam did not hesitate. "No, Your Honor. I intend to remind it who it serves." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bondi's client, seated behind her, looked stunned. This wasn't just a defense strategy. It was a siege. Bondi wasn't retreating from the judge's mockery. She was pulling the foundation out from under it. Roberts turned to the clerk. "Strike her last comment from the record." The gavel came down, sharp and fast, but Bondi raised a hand. "Let it be stricken. That does not make it untrue." The audacity, no, the precision of that response stunned even her critics. It was the kind of moment legal scholars quote in classrooms, not because of its theatrics, but because of its unmistakable clarity. Pam turned back to her desk, but the real statement had already been made. and Roberts knew it. The courtroom was now walking on eggshells, not because of chaos, but because of clarity. That was more dangerous. Truth wielded with elegance. Across the room, a legal observer whispered to another, "He is going to try and shut her down. He has to." And he tried. Roberts began speaking over her, interjecting into her statements, attempting to dictate her rhythm. But Bondi adjusted. Each time he cut in, she returned sharper. Each time he narrowed the legal scope, she widened the moral one. She played the courtroom like an instrument, every note striking just where the judge wanted silence. It was relentless, but it was not rude. It was powerful, but never unhinged. And in that balance, she found her edge. At one point, Bondi turned toward the gallery. "This court is not a stage, and I am not here to perform. I am here to protect those without power from those who have forgotten why they were granted it." Another ripple, another wound to the false authority Roberts had tried to wield. And then came the turning point. A motion was filed, one that Bondi had prepared as a contingency. A request to recuse Judge Roberts for bias, citing his past statements, rulings, and now his conduct in the courtroom. The motion was delivered with such precision that even the opposing counsel blinked in disbelief. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in disbelief. Bondi was not just defending her client. She was accusing the system of breaching its own oath, and she had the receipts. Judge Roberts, visibly shaken, called for a recess. But everyone knew this was not about scheduling. This was about retreat. He had mocked her, underestimated her, tried to silence her. Now he was fleeing from her shadow, and the real trial had only just begun. When Judge Roberts finally returned to the bench, the air in the courtroom had changed. Gone was the smug confidence he once wore like armor. In its place was a fragile stillness, one born of careful recalibration. He no longer saw Pam Bondi as a political nuisance or a woman trying to punch above her weight. No, he saw her for what she truly was now, a strategist, a tactician, and in this arena perhaps his equal. But she had no interest in gloating. Pam's demeanor remained composed, almost surgical. She was not there for spectacle. She was there for justice, and she would drag it out of this courtroom if she had to dig through every precedent to do it. Roberts opened with a voice that betrayed the strain beneath it. "After reviewing the motion submitted, I will allow argument on the matter of recusal." Briefly, it was a crack in the dam, a crack that would only widen. Pam stood slowly, lifting a binder with the calm of someone who had already seen how this would end. Her tone was crisp, her words carefully chosen. "Your Honor, this court does not belong to you. It belongs to the people. And when bias creeps in, when rulings align too conveniently with old alliances, with outdated ideologies, someone has to speak, even if it means drawing ire from the very seat of judgment." She placed a document on the bench. "This is your ruling from 12 years ago. In it, you stated, and I quote, 'Any justice who shows contempt for the defense undermines the very balance of the bench.' You said those words. Today, I am asking this court to live by them." The courtroom was silent. The opposing counsel remained still. Even the stenographer had slowed, as though bracing for a shift in gravity. And Roberts leaned back. There it was. Not just a challenge, but a mirror, a reflection of his own standards staring back at him from the mouth of the very woman he had once ridiculed. He tried to pivot. "Counselor Bondi, this motion—" But she interrupted, not with noise, but with proof. "Your campaign contributions, your speaking engagements, your public comments, all on record, all relevant, all indicative of a pattern. It was not an ambush. It was an autopsy. Cold, clean, undeniable." Then something extraordinary happened. A junior clerk handed Roberts a note. He glanced at it, then paused. His jaw tightened. The note was not from the media. It was from within. A quiet advisory from the judicial board. A suggestion that if he did not step down from the case voluntarily, a formal inquiry might follow. Pam had struck deeper than the courtroom. She had rattled the institution. He cleared his throat. This court will take the motion under advisement. But it was a delay tactic. Everyone knew the outcome had already been set in motion. Pam returned to her seat, but even as she sat, her presence loomed. Not loud, not brash, but unmistakable. Later that day, as the news broke outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Reporters began recounting what had transpired, not with gossip, but with reverence. They spoke of how one woman, armed only with facts, forced the most powerful judge in the country to reconsider his place. Pam Bondi gave no interviews. She walked straight through the crowd, unbothered by the noise, focused on the path ahead, because it was never about Roberts. It was about reminding a nation that no one, not even the highest legal authority, was beyond the reach of accountability. And though the judge had mocked her, interrupted her, tried to intimidate her in the end, it was his silence that said the most. He had been heard, and he had been shaken. When the gavel fell to officially close the case, the weight of what had transpired settled over the courtroom like a held breath finally released. Judge Roberts, once the unassailable face of judicial authority, sat in muted contemplation. His eyes met Pam Bondi's across the bench for a brief moment. No smirk, no sarcasm. Just the acknowledgement of a battle he had waged and lost. Outside the courtroom, reporters clamored for statements, but Bondi remained composed. She had come here not for headlines, but for justice, and now she had both. Her legal team gathered around her, offering quiet congratulations as cameras flashed. Yet she offered a single nod of gratitude before stepping forward to address those waiting beyond the courtroom doors. "Today was not about me," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "It was about ensuring that our institutions reflect the principles they were founded upon. When power goes unchecked, we all suffer. But when one person, any person, stands up, it sends a message. No one is above the law." The press corps erupted into applause, a rare moment of genuine respect in the cacophony of modern media. Her supporters cheered, skeptics took note. In that moment, Pam Bondi had transformed from former Attorney General to emblem of accountability. But the story did not end in the courthouse. In the days that followed, the Judicial Board quietly announced an inquiry into the recusal motion. In parallel, legislative committees began drafting proposals to tighten ethical guidelines for judges. Bondi's action had ignited a movement, one that crossed party lines and united voices, demanding transparency and fairness in the halls of power. In Washington, commentators debated the fallout. Some lauded Bondi's courage. Others lamented the humiliation of the Chief Justice. Yet nearly all conceded one truth. The balance of justice had shifted, if only slightly, toward the side of the people. Back at her office, Bondi unpacked her briefcase from that pivotal day. She looked at the worn leather and the files she had carried into the courtroom, documents that had rebuked the most powerful judge in the nation. A small smile crossed her face. She knew this win was not the end, but rather the beginning of a larger journey toward preserving the integrity of the legal system. And somewhere in chambers far above, Judge Roberts reviewed the recusal motion once more. His reputation had been tarnished, his mockery turned back upon him, and his authority humbled. Yet the institution endured, now reminded of its vulnerability and its need for constant vigilance. Pam Bondi walked away from the Supreme Court that afternoon as the victor of a battle few believed she could win. Her footsteps echoed on the marble steps, not with the arrogance of triumph, but with the surety of conviction. She had faced the highest bench in the land, and through her intellect, determination, and unwavering respect for the rule of law, she had prevailed. This was more than a single case. It was a testament to what happens when one person dares to stand up, when one voice refuses to be silenced. And it served as a reminder that in the pursuit of justice, the true power always resides with those who are bold enough to wield it.